and welcome to the February 23rd, 2022 meetings of the Lower Merion Board of Commissioners. We have two meetings this evening, the Building and Planning Committee and a special Board of Commissioners meeting. I'll remind you that our masking protocol here is that if you are speaking, you may unmask if you are vaccinated. If you are not vaccinated or you're not speaking, we ask that you keep your mask on. And with that, I will recognize the chair of the Building and Planning Committee, Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you, President Sinai. A number of items tonight. The first item is to a motion to table for the preliminary land development plan and developers agreement for 231 and 251 St. Asaph's Road and Ballard Plaza. So I am going to move to table consideration of the preliminary land development plan and developers agreement for 231 and 251 St. Asaph's Road and 1 and 3 Ballard Plaza until March 9th of the March 9th Building and Planning meeting. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner McComb. Any discussion about the table? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Thank you. Any opposed? Seeing none, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item is the certificate of appropriateness for 537 Old Lancaster Road at Haverford Station. This is something that we discussed at the last building and planning meeting. I see Greg Pritchard has come to the podium. So Greg, why don't you go ahead?
Certainly. Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. I will endeavor to share my screen here. Okay, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, this is a HARB application to replace several elements of the porch on this residence in the Haverford Station District. Here's some views of the porch as submitted by the applicant for this application. Since that meeting, we have worked with the Township's historic preservation consultant to more fully understand why the two elements not recommended for approval by HARB are not appropriate for historic resources such as this one. She explained that the elements being covered are original portions of the porch, that covering them could trap moisture and hasten long-term deterioration of those elements, and create voids where moisture could collect. They would also, the wrapping of the porch beam, as seen here, and this is a before and after porch condition diagram that our consultant came up with, and I would ask you to focus on this area right here showing the beam. So again, I'll go back. This is the present condition. This is the proposed, showing the new material that would be applied over top of that beam. And the recommendation from our consultant states that the proportions of that beam would appear to be different than they are now, in addition to that possible maintenance, long-term maintenance concern. Those elements do not appear to be deteriorated in such a state that they would need to be fully replaced the way some other elements of the porch are proposed. And HARB did recommend approval of the majority of those elements at their meeting on February 1st. I think we went over most of this 2 weeks ago, but I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Does anyone have any questions for Greg? I see none. I can't see our commissioners. I'm sorry. I can't see our commissioners online.
I will stop sharing.
I see no questions or comments from them. So to get this moving, I'm going to put a motion up. I am going to move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners approval to replace the porch elements and denial of cladding two existing porch room elements, citing Secretary of the Interior Standard 9 for 537 Old Lancaster Road, Haverford Station Historic District. Is there a second? Thank you, President Sinai. Okay. Any commissioner comments on this? I see none. Is there any public comment? Jody, is anyone online? No. Okay, Commissioner Zeloff.
I'll simply say, Commissioner Grimes, that the staff memo that we just got was pretty good. And it makes it pretty clear that the two items that are here for denial are visible from the public way. And therefore, they fall under the purview of what we do in terms of preservation of historic homes, and anything that's designated historic, it's what's viewable from the public way. I don't think we should debate if it's proper maintenance or not. That's not the issue. The issue is the historic elements, and are they viewable from the public way, and they are. So
Okay.
I am supportive.
Okay,
I
thank
wish
you.
Ms. Gillen were here, but she is not, so
Okay,
thank you.
thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Commissioner McKee.
Yeah, just to echo Commissioner Zeloff's sentiments a little bit about the maintenance issue. I think this is purely an aesthetic issue because under the standards, you're not supposed to destroy historic materials. And really all what's going on here with these materials, this may accelerate the deterioration if you use the applicant's materials, but it's not going to destroy anything. It's just a matter of how long it will last. So I think that Commissioner Zeloff really framed it the correct way in saying this is about aesthetics, not maintenance.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I will call the motion. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Okay, any opposed? I see two. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. Commissioners Courtney and McKeon, can this go on consent? I see yes, thank you. So that'll go on consent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. The next item is concerning the appointment of the zoning officer. Chris, are you going to,
The next item.
oh, okay.
Commissioner,
I'm sorry.
I'll speak to this.
Yes, thank you. Mr. McNeely, would you like to speak to it now?
Certainly. So Commissioners, as most of you are aware, our longtime zoning officer retired the first week of January. And on January 3rd, you appointed Scott Houskins as the temporary zoning officer, which allowed us to go through the required process under the Workers Association labor union agreement to post the position and go through a process of coming up with a candidate. Scott, prior to January 3rd, had been working with Mike Wiley, our previous zoning officer, for quite a period of time and assisting with zoning officer duties. He's certified as a zoning officer. He's done a good job with assisting the past zoning officer, and he's also done a good job since you appointed him to serve as a temporary zoning officer on January 3rd. Therefore, I have put him forth as a nominated candidate to be appointed zoning officer. This is one of the unusual positions whereby, sort of like a department head, but not a department head, in that I bring the nomination to you, and you as a board decide whether to make the appointment. Be glad to answer any questions. I did provide everybody with Scott's resume.
Okay, well, let me put a motion out there, and thank you, Ernie. I will move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners the appointment of Scott Houskins as zoning officer in accordance with Chapter 5, Article 3 of the Code of the Township of Lower Merion. Is there a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavrin. Okay, anyone have any questions for our township manager? Let me just say, and I'll open up for comments, I'll just say first that I've had opportunity, like many of us have had, to work with Scott in his previous position. I've also been to a zoning hearing board meeting or two and seen him at his current position, aside from the regular duties with dealing with applications, and I am pleased to endorse this, and I thank our township manager for putting him up for consideration. So, any other commissioners with any comments? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this?
Yes, there is.
Oh, okay. Please, sir.
My name is John Willis. I'm a resident of Lower Merion Township, was born in the town. And I'm part of the growing and sometimes controversial Save Oakwell group. And we frequently complain, but when we think that good deeds come our way, they should be complimented. And we want to compliment Scott for his amazing responsiveness in dealing with all the many, many emails that we have sent him in the past couple months. And we greatly appreciate it.
Great.
And I've never met him. I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, but he's done a terrific job so far.
Great. Well, thank you very much, sir. Is there any other public comment? Anyone online? Okay, I see none, so I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Great. Any opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you, and congratulations to Scott. The next item is concerning appointment to the Zoning Hearing Board. I am going to recommend to the Board of Commissioners, or move to recommend to the Board of Commissioners, appointment of Anthony Vail to the Zoning Hearing Board for a 3-year term to expire February 2025. Is there a second? Thank you, Commissioner Zelov. Let me just say, thank Mr. Vail for his willingness to serve. As many of us know, Mr. Vail has already been serving as an alternate. The way the Zoning Hearing Board typically works is that you start as an alternate, and then as there are vacancies, you move to the regular position, but as an alternate, you sit and hear many cases as he has done. And he has become a valued member of the board, so I'm pleased to endorse him for a regular appointment to the board, and again, thank him for his service. Are there other commissioners who wish to comment? Commissioner Zelloff.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Just to add briefly to what you said in support of Tony Vail, he served for probably 10 years on the Planning Commission and was co-chair at one point. He was effective and dedicated, and he then moved to the alternate position on the Zoning Hearing Board, where he has served for 3 years. He is an attorney, but a retired attorney, so he has time. He has great interest, and I'm confident that Tony Vail will be serve effectively and with great dedication as a Zoning Hearing Board member.
Thank you. Any other commissioners wish to comment? Is there any public comment on this matter? Does not appear to be. Okay. I will call the vote. All those in favor, please raise your hand signifying aye. Thank you. Any opposed? Please raise your hands. Seeing none, passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The last item on the agenda is our Building and Planning Department Director's Report. So I'm going to call on Mr. Leswing and ask that he not break my record for the fastest building and planning meeting on record. Or if you need to, go ahead, Chris.
There is the minor detail of the 7 o'clock start.
Let me give it my best shot. There are a couple matters. We had a little bit of time this evening. I just wanted to update the board on 7 main points that have been out that we usually don't get the chance to communicate. Just first, it's just a regular update on staffing, where we just went through the appointment of a new zoning officer. That creates an opportunity to backfill Scott's position. Just wanted to inform the BMP that currently we just recently had 3 promotions. One was the new zoning officer. We have a new building inspector, but that had been our former housing inspector. And then we have a new housing inspector, which formerly had been Claire Shields, who had formerly been at the front counter. So we've been doing a lot of promotion from within. It's all very exciting. We think those are all great promotions, but then we also have 5 vacancies. Most of those are on the planning side. Or it's 4 vacancies and 1 medical that'll go out, but we have some space, but we're working with HR to fill those and hopefully get back up to full staffing, this spring. But just update everybody on that. Of interest, I know that a topic is the lighting ordinance. This is something that the township's been worked with a consultant and we took it through a draft with the township solicitor, and we're planning on distributing it to the Planning Commission this Friday. The Planning Commission will just receive it next Monday. They have a rather full agenda. We try to give these sort of ordinances to Planning Commission a month ahead of time, so they have time to review it. They'll review it at their April meeting, and then we'll bring it forward to the BMP at the April BMP. So we'll have time for the public to see that and for that discussion to work its way through the process. The Ardmore Master Plan is moving along. Staff has met. We received 8 proposals from qualified consultants, very exciting proposals. Some far as away as Florida, a lot of good local firms. All were very well thought out. What we've done is narrow that down to 4 top candidates, and we're going to conduct interviews over the end of this week and make a recommendation for the March 9th BMP. With that, if a consultant is appointed by the board in March, what we would imagine would take about a month for the consultant to get up, and they would probably begin that process starting in May. And the way that most of the consultants have looked at it, it's really a year-long process. It's within a month or two, somewhere maybe 11 months, most of them were 12 months. Actually, I think that works to our advantage. One of these things where I know we've all been wanting to get things moving forward, but I think it would have been harder to do this during the pandemic. One of the key pieces of the Ardmore Master Plan is public engagement. And part of public engagement is engaging together. When we're doing it, we're getting good at Zoom, but really I think it'll be much more beneficial to the community, hopefully with the pandemic subsiding, that people can gather again, we can meet, because a lot of this, what we want to talk about with Ardmore, is to get on the streets. All of the consultants include very robust public engagement in their proposals. Many of them talked about gathering, charrettes, those kind of things that are much better done in person. So hopefully with things trending in the right direction, that'll be the time that will be good for that project. Staff is also working on getting draft 2.0 of the Saldo. We should have that posted to the website this Friday. We'll be bringing that forward to the BMP on March 9th. We've had a number of comments from staff, from the advisory bodies, and from the public. Those have all been incorporated in. One thing I do want to comment on that, we do get some comments that sometimes come in where people send us, from a staff standpoint, links to projects, or this other community has done that. And while that can somewhat be helpful, what our process has always been with the comprehensive plan, with the zoning ordinance, and with Saldo, it's very issues-based. We know what we're trying to solve. Just because somebody does something somewhere else doesn't mean that applies to us. We know what we're trying to fix. So that's how we've tried to apply it, and we've really tried to look through and look at all of these comments. They've been very good comments, and just kind of bringing that forward, and we'll see that in March 9th. Just to mention that, with institutional zoning, this was something that was brought up. I know that there was a letter read last week at the Board of Commissioners meeting by the Federation concerning institutional zoning. One part of that was, when staff met with the Federation several months ago, there had been a question raised that do institutions apply, or are they applicable to the Saldo? And the way that the Saldo works for application, the Saldo applies to all residential properties, more than 2 units, and all non-residential structures. That captures everything. It doesn't mean we don't differentiate between commercial or institutional, it's just non-residential. If that does it, that triggers. It's a very broad umbrella. And that's my understanding of the letter from the Federation, that they were in disagreement that somehow institutions need to be specifically called out. I don't know more specifics of the letter. I'm actually frankly disappointed that no one from the Federation bothered to call staff to discuss this point before issuing that letter. If they had, we would have been able to respond a little bit more in detail, and I hope that anybody from the Federation, if they have more detail on that, would give me a call. You know, we answer our calls, we answer our emails, we're happy to continue that. There's another piece of the institutional zoning which had come out when we talked about institutional zoning with the zoning, was a campus plan idea, of having an idea that when institutions expand, or when they need to do a larger modernization, that there would be provisions in that to allow that sort of expansion. Right now, institutions with the new zoning, much of the impervious surface is very limiting to them. In order to expand, there would need to be a zoning change that actually moved them to a different zoning category in the institutional district that allowed a higher degree of impervious surface. Those provisions are very complicated. We have a good framework for them. We haven't had any pressure or real demand from institutions for that, but we do anticipate with a couple institutions this year that we'd be able to do that and work that. That is the kind of thing that in the community, we need to work with institutions and work with the community. It's not something you can just sit and have a standard and plug it into this. It's almost like it's a separate ordinance to it. The Saldo encompasses a lot of things to itself, and it's really about processing of plans and land development. There's some other things that are tacked into that that can be added in a little bit separately. And institutional zoning is certainly one of those things that can be developed in parallel and then added back in as we work that out. I do have some good news to report with the Kinwood Trail extensions. About 2 years ago, the township received a grant. We've been working with Cmte to extend the Kinwood Trail from Kinwood Station to Ballast Station. Pandemic hit, Cmte lost a lot of staff, and we lost traction with Cmte. Finally today, at 4:30, we received the first draft lease to extend that. That's the key piece of this. With that draft lease, we can begin to move on to final design and bid the project out. So hopefully maybe by the end of the year, we can be under construction with that project. It's fully funded, it's ready to go. It'll be a great extension of the trail. It essentially takes the Kinwood Trail from Kinwood Station all the way out to City Avenue. And then staff is continuing to work with Norfolk Southern to try to get a further extension of the Kinwood Trail down to the waterfront. We're waiting on a lease, but we've worked out all of the major details with the corporate part of Norfolk Southern in Atlanta. They've agreed to all of our proposals. There's a tunnel that we need to go through, and they want us to secure that. We had to provide engineered documents, and that went back and forth, and that they've all agreed to that. Now we're just waiting for the final language for that lease. But we're moving on that. And then finally, the mainline greenway. Staff's been working through the pandemic. This has been one of those things that people can actually gather. You can ride bikes together safely. Last year, staff had over a dozen group rides, and we've developed a route that extends from City Avenue all the way out to Villanova. It's a low-stress route that you don't have to ride on Montgomery Avenue or Lancaster Avenue. You can ride on all the local roads. What we've tried to focus on from a staff standpoint is getting the first half of that done, going from the Kinwood Trail to Haverford College. It's a little bit different animal when you get west. You can see on this document that anything that's colored in yellow is a little bit harder. We still need to work that out. Most of that is working on permission across institutional campuses and working that out. But on the eastern part, we have a lot more traction, and most of this is really in place. But there are what we've identified as 3 stress points. We've been working with Public Works and Traffic Safety to address these stress points. Right now, I'd say it's a very rideable route, and as these blue routes go, there's an easy way to get from Kinwood Trail all the way to Haverford College, through North Ardmore and south of Lancaster Avenue in South Ardmore, Wynwood area. Those stress points are over by Greenfield Avenue, by Haverford College, Woodside Road and Wynwood Road, where Narberth and Lower Marion meet by Shortridge Park, and then the Bowman Avenue Bridge over by Marion Elementary School. Traffic safety has been very helpful. They're really looking at focusing on the Bowman Avenue Bridge, which is probably the hardest part of this, where you're coming out as a 25-mile-an-hour road, you're on a bike, and then you're reaching Bowman Road, but people go a little bit faster. It's not quite 25. Sometimes people are going 30. That creates some stress. They're looking at ways to either do some lane striping or a side path. That'll actually have to be something that their solution will probably then go into the CIP next year to be able to do it. We have looked at Woodside Avenue and Wynwood Road, and that's very difficult. Right now, it needs to be something that needs to be done as part of a larger corridor, but it'll show up on those plans. As that area is only going to be focused on more for traffic safety and calming over the years, this is another thing to kind of incorporate into that. It's just, that's an area of the Greenway that you can cross. It's safe to cross. It could just certainly be more convenient. And as times go on and we develop these roadways over the years, that'll be one of those things that we can do. And then finally, all of the points that we've been able to connect into City Avenue. The green line that I have here that's to the left of the document shows the mainline greenway and how it hits City Avenue. And over the last couple of months, the commissioners have received land development approval, land development applications, one for the Ballackinwood Shopping Center, which is the lower green arrow, and then you're currently reviewing the 123 Balla project, which is the upper green arrow. Both of those arrows will hit either St. Asaph's or Belmont Avenue and have signalized, what's currently proposed, signalized crossings. So there's a safe way to access those trails in City Avenue. It's seamless, and this not only helps for recreation, but it's also really part of the township's transportation demand strategy to try to reduce congestion and allow people to commute to and from City Avenue. So that's just my summary of many points. I'm sure you have some questions you might want to ask me, and I'm happy to answer them.
Chris, thank you. And let me say first, I hope that you've been able to say exactly, notwithstanding my snide comment before, that you've said exactly everything you wanted to cover in the report.
I have.
Okay, just want to be sure. So, anyone have any questions or comments? Commissioner Courtney?
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Chris, would you mind throwing back up that first slide? That'll sort of help me stay on target.
With my list,
Yes, please.
I think I can get to that slide.
Awesome. Let's start with the lighting ordinance. It's great to see that draft come out. I know that there are members of the public who are very excited to get a review of that. I'm glad that we have the month of March for everyone to digest it. Will there be any opportunity for public feedback in that time? Is there any expectation of public presentation or meeting? How should people comment? Should they be waiting for planning commission on April?
We usually, as standard practice is, an ordinance would go to the planning commission. So the proper forum to comment would be the planning commission. And this gives everybody several weeks to review that. It's looking that, you know, the April planning commission meeting will have time for that. This is certainly something we want to tack on at 10:30 at night and everybody wade through. So I think we would have that. That's the proper forum for that. Then you'd have public comment, work through that, and then bring that to the building planning committee.
Do you have any intention of going to civic associations? You can imagine the Wynwood Civic is very interested in this, and I imagine other neighborhood groups around potential stadium sites would be as well?
Yes, I imagine there's a lot of interest from the Wynwood Civic Association in this topic. With our schedule coming up, we have a lot of meetings coming up. I hadn't really tried to figure that out. If I can accommodate that, I will, but no one from the Wynwood Civic Association has invited me yet, so.
Okay. I brought it up to them last night. I scared them for a second because I said it was coming out on the 28th and forgot to mention that we wouldn't talk about it till April 4th. So I'm sorry if you got any angry emails, but I did try to clarify. On the Ardmore Master Plan, another civic association, the North Ardmore Civic, is very keen to start participating. It's exciting to see we'll have a consultant. When will the official public outreach for people to volunteer in our public charrettes, et cetera, start?
So it won't start, you need to make that action first. I need to bring you, staff needs to bring you a recommendation, you need to appoint the consultant. But imagine if it goes according to schedule, the consultant will be up and running in May, and they'll have their, by that time they'll have outlined their public engagement strategy. All of them are very robust. That was one of the major focuses of this RFP. And most of them are front-loaded. So for the most part, the consultants are coming up, they're going to be reviewing existing plans. There's a lot of history to Ardmore, there's a lot of previous planning, there's a lot of understanding existing conditions, but then they move into that. So it would be late spring, and then I imagine we take summer off, and then it would be fall for public engagement. But public engagement isn't for all of the consultants that we're considering, isn't a one and done. Isn't like you have one meeting. But all of them have looked at a stakeholder committee, meeting with civic associations, having charrettes, having a series of pop-ups. They all had, it was great reading through these proposals, seeing all the different variations of what they're looking to do. And they also recognize that the same strategy for North Ardmore probably doesn't work for South Ardmore. They're looking at really breaking this up and trying to reach as many people as they can. For North Ardmore, one thing they should be interested in is many of our consultants have mentioned that they really do need to meet people who have previously participated in the process to get some of that history. So North Ardmore has been identified as a key part of that.
Great, excellent. On the saldo, last night, the EAC produced a memo that they have voted to approve and pass along to the Sustainability Committee. What's the proper way for us to give that to you, since the public comment period on draft 2 has ended?
The sustainability manager forwarded that to staff this afternoon. We've done an early review. We're going to actually be meeting with the township solicitor tomorrow and discussing that.
Oh, you predicted my next question. In that memo, there were 2 particular calculations, just for my colleagues. A recommendation that developers calculate energy use intensity and embodied carbon of any project. And the initial response from BMP was there's some legal concerns. So will we get a full legal analysis on that?
Yeah, we're looking at it with the solicitor, and then we're also looking at it with our building inspectors as well.
Okay.
So we're aligning that with the actual codes themselves, because I imagine the solicitor isn't quite familiar with the building codes as he is with the land development codes, but we're looking at it from both ways. Because sometimes with the codes, they're dynamic. The codes have been approved, but we're anticipating other codes will be approved in different years for that, particularly for energy. So we'll be able to give everybody an update on that.
Okay, great. My only question on institutional zoning is that it doesn't have any dates up there.
Yep, it doesn't, but it's coming. I know that from our workload, we're really anticipating a couple larger institutions coming forward in the Marion area. That'll be part of that institutional zoning, part of that, to really look at that for campus planning, because that's a key piece of this. If institutions are moving forward with plans for work on their campuses, making sure that we have those provisions in place. The existing zoning now works fine, right? The existing zoning's fine if things stay the same. It's when things need to expand that you need to add those additional provisions in, and that takes a balance between both neighbors and the institutions.
Okay.
And we will be as cautious with this as we were when we adopted the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance.
Should I assume that the items above on this list that have dates attached to them are taking a higher priority than completion of our institutional zoning?
No, I just think I just have those dates off the top of my head.
Okay.
I think some of the institutional zoning is a little more out of my control because there's many variables involved. As I mentioned, the institutional zoning is something I just can't sit in my office and craft. It's going to take, so many of our institutions are different. So you need consistent principles, but you need to have some flexibility that it can apply to individual circumstances. So it's going to take it's going to be dynamic. There's a little bit of information you need from the institutions, and you need from familiarity with the neighborhood to do that. So it's just more involved than some of these others, which are a little bit more clean cut.
I guess I'm a little surprised at that, because I would have thought that we would have had all that information over the several years spent rewriting the zoning code, and we had initially planned to include institutional zoning in that. I guess why is there still more data gathering needed? Do we need to engage with another consultant? What do we need to do to actually
I would
timeline
say
this?
this is our local problem, and I would say we do not need a consultant for this. This is something that staff is aware of. We're working with the institutions, and I think if you hear from institutions will say they could use a little more. But we really haven't had I haven't had a lot of outcry from institutions saying that they need something from the township. And we haven't, in the last 2 years since we adopted zoning code, heard a lot of neighbors complaining about institutions. So from my perspective, I think it's working. Yeah, so some crafting to allow flexibility when institutions change, and that's the reality of institutions. They are not permanent. Institutions, while you think they are permanent, because these big stone walls around them and very old buildings, they're actually very dynamic. And they do change, and institutions leave and are reoccupied, and when that happens, that creates times that you need to have more flexibility, because the new use probably needs different standards than the previous use.
I mean, they may not be related to zoning, but I feel like we hear a fair amount of complaining about institutions pretty regularly. Last one, Mainline Greenway. I love this project. I am excited to see progress. I guess it is my hope that if it is not already in the CIP, that everything needed to complete the project will be in the CIP, or at least presented to us in the CIP this year, whether that's the Bowman Bridge that you already mentioned, signage, anything else that needs to be in there. It would be great to have that all incorporated. Is that going to be possible?
You'll have that. And I mean, this is something that was a staff project that was really done with the community. I really want to give a lot of credit to Lou Savastani, Kimberly Bizak from the Narberth Bicycle Club. Really, it was people going out, figuring out how this thing worked. We could have hired a consultant, they could have come up with something, and it wouldn't have been nearly this good. This is very organic of people from the community who know the community. One of the great takeaways now that we have is working with Public Works and Traffic Safety. I can bring you forward a map. We can publish a map. We can tell people this is where to go. Before did we have the blessing? We didn't want to send places that people said that it was unsafe. Well, now we have a map, and we can there are points that we say are stressful, but over time we can make them less stressful. But we have that route. So that was a major accomplishment. So we'll be able to put that on.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you, Commissioner Courtney. Commissioner O'Neill?
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that the top 7 here aren't necessarily in priority order, although I get that they're very important. The one question I had that wasn't on the list, and others may share the same question, is when natural features code is scheduled to be looked at, only because it is, especially with respect to stormwater and how these interact, and it becomes sort of this repeating theme, and I would love to see that scheduled for sometime this year.
It's right after we finish Saldo. So as soon as Saldo is adopted, the same people just kind of move. We turn our attention to the natural features code.
Great, thank you. And also in the lighting, I just wonder whether, and again, this we'll review it in March and into April, but before it goes to advertisement, one of the ideas I had was to incorporate sample colors, so that if you're not an engineer of lighting and we're like, well, what are we looking at above? It would be good to have that sort of identifier as maybe one page with just colors, with a label of this equals this in terms of warmth and whatever luminaires or what have you. I think that would be so helpful, just as a layman's use, because we're going to have a lot of homeowners referring to this as they want to put up their own lights. So that was my one comment, that we'll flip through it again, of course, before we advertise. And then my other question about the Greenway, just another sort of general feedback, is the Trek in Wayne and the ones in Phoenixville all have a board, almost like a memo board of the different routes that bikers can take. And I think the faster we can get our map up, displayed in commercial centers or in stores who have the space, that's excellent. It's a great tie-in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Zella?
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Chris, I think you may have made the changes to institutional zoning sound easier than they will be. We have institutional zoning. We approved it 2 years ago. We struggled mightily on the one piece of it called the campus plan. We had the room full. We had meetings with institutions. Institutions had meetings with institutions. There were written analysis. It was a very engaged process, and we couldn't get there. So we made the wise decision to conclude the zoning code. And 2 years ago, we passed a momentous change to our zoning code and created, for the first time in the township's history, institutional zoning. From what I can see 2 years later, even though it's been a difficult 2 years, it's working. So I think you were very wise to not put a date on that chart, because it would be meaningless. It is not just unfolding all the papers that we looked at 2 years ago and proceeding. We tried and we didn't do that. It's going to be a re-engagement process. And it's going to be very, very difficult. Because our institution, there's many reasons, but our institutions come in very small sizes to very large sizes. And flexibility is a good thing, but writing down flexibility is a very difficult thing. And so I live in a part of the township where there are many institutions, and I get very few complaints. Now, I know that's not the case throughout the township, but speaking from where I live, where there are many institutions. So I think that we should There are many more important priorities on that list, in my view. And I don't think you should be putting a date on it like you haven't. And I think if we can work our way through it, but we should all be aware how difficult it is going to be when we re-engage that process. We would like a campus plan from some of our commercial property owners and can't get it. And you know one specifically that I'm referring to, and there are probably others. And so it is going to be difficult. So making that point, can you comment, please, for us? We heard a week ago a letter read by the Federation about institutional zoning. The question was asked of me at a civic meeting this week. I don't understand the question or the issue, so maybe you can help me, and maybe others have the same question.
Certainly, and I don't have the letter in front of me, and I was forwarded the letter. I wasn't sent the letter, but I was provided the letter and I read it. From what I've interpreted from the letter, it's a very general letter. It's not very specific, but the letter says that somehow institutions have been omitted from the saldo consideration.
But that's not true, is it?
It's not true. Okay. And what I go back to is when staff first started our public engagement for saldo, we met with many civic associations and other groups, and one of the groups we met with was the Federation. And this is a concern. Institutions have always been a concern to the Federation, and it was brought up that, and this is, people read, and this has happened throughout the entire public engagement process, the public review of this document. People are reading a document for the first time that there's many things that haven't changed at all. Much of the saldo is just transferred back from what it is today. It goes back to what triggers the application of the saldo. When are those standards in play? And they are in play based on the definition of land development. Land development is the development of more than 2 residential units or construction of a non-residential building. It's that simple. So you use that as your guide. Well, when we were meeting with the Federation, it was brought up, well, that doesn't include institutions. And we said, well, it does. That definition, by saying non-residential, which is commercial and institutional, instead of saying institutional, we're trying to save some words, it's a long document, but it's that easy, it's that easy, so it applies. We didn't need to then go back and say, well, this applies to institutions and this applies, because it's in the initial definition of what land development is that's triggering the use of that ordinance in the first time. I thought I had explained that, I put it in writing, I was surprised to see this in the letter, and that's the best I can tell you what I think that letter means. Once again, I've said, no one from the Federation has given me a call or written me with any details on that. I'm sure after this meeting, I will have an email and I will have a call and I will have the opportunity to follow up on that. But to the best of my knowledge, that's what I think the issue is.
And if you don't get a call after the meeting, then I think you should initiate one to say this was presented publicly, we all got a copy a day or two later, it wasn't clear the issue wasn't clear, you clarified it, I believe, and so I think that it should be responded to as you have done so. Thank you.
It's on my list to make those calls, I just haven't gotten it.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you. President Sinai.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. So just a couple of things. So first, Chris, thank you for that update. There's a lot going on, and you're looking remarkably bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for someone who's probably not getting a whole lot of sleep. But so first, thank you for all the efforts on the Main Line Greenway. I think you've moved along well, and I think the riding group that was put together, it sounds like it was very productive. I'll note it was, it's not just the route, of course, it's also the sign posting, as it were, that becomes important. And sort of I'll throw my 2 cents in that. I think it's an exciting project. I think the minute it gets done, it gets used. It's the kind of thing that can get accomplished in relatively near term and generate immediate benefit. And I'm looking forward to seeing that come out. The other is institutional zoning, which, as Commissioner Zeloff said, is extremely complicated. And in part because it has differential impact on different kinds of properties, small ones versus large, public versus private, right? When we did the zoning code before, Commissioner Zeloff was spot on. We got to this point with institutional zoning where we said, okay, we're going to just like zone it and give it some impervious, and like all the other things, the three different ways of dealing with the issue that the consultants, experts had provided, we did 0 of the 3, right? We were like, we cannot decide, we're going to just put this off till later, and we put it off till after Saldo, in effect, right? Because the Saldo was important to get done. I think that's the right call. I will say before, the campus plan at that time. So this is the issue when topics come up that are you haven't worked on yet. Like people are like, there's a reason. Probably best not to talk about them until we have more to talk about. The campus plan requirement before was a requirement. It was a de facto requirement in the previous code. It was wrapped as an incentive, but it wasn't one. It was a requirement, and many institutions quite rightly said, hey, we cannot do that and should not have to do that. We are not planning on expanding or changing or doing anything, and why would we have to go through an expensive and time-consuming process of doing a master plan? I think that was exactly the right call for this board to not make them go through that. I think the question is for the small number of institutions that need to evolve. That this board, when we passed the zoning code, said we are going to constrain the impervious, but we're going to try and find a way in the future to let institutions that do need to evolve. Like, what is the mechanism for that? And I think that's what you're incipiently working on.
That's exactly
I
what
hope.
we're working
And so, that would be the kind of thing that would have to come to the board and have lots of discussion. I think it would be complicated, as Commissioner Zeloff said, but I think it's much more circumscribed than what had been envisioned as in institutional zoning by this board before. I think this board had previously decided that it did not want such a broad brush in this township. Anyway, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's really good to get the update. Thank you. Commissioner
If I could
Brown,
just,
thank you.
one last thing about the mainline greenway. One of the hard things of the mainline greenway that we haven't been able to figure out is how, when you get to Ardmore, what do? We can get people to Ardmore, but you really can't get through Ardmore. You can't ride on Lancaster Avenue. You can't ride on the sidewalk. All of the proposals for the Ardmore Master Plan address that issue. They all include this active transportation component. So we're going to get some added value with the mainline greenway with the Ardmore Master Plan.
Thank you. Before we head to this side of the dais, I'm going to look at the commissioners that are online to see if any of them have any questions or comments. I see none. Of course, you'll have one last chance when we're finished this go-around. So, Commissioner Stevenson, why don't you be next?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lesswing, I just wanted to follow up on the question that my colleague, Mr. Courtney, had asked about the consultant for institution, and I guess I'm not understanding why, if we are, and I understand your department has done an omen's job, understaffed, and you're constantly having to replenish qualified folks that to do the
Commissioner
job.
Stevenson, a little difficulty hearing you on this side.
I'm sorry, it was a personal conversation.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Yeah, no, not your fault. Just,
So should I start over?
Maybe I should not
there we go. Aha.
There we go.
You have to start all over.
I have no problem doing that. Having said all that, why, this is a major conversation that we've been having, and it's been an issue that we really need to look at. And why wouldn't a consultant be appropriate at this particular time?
I'm just going to be honest. I don't think we could find a consultant that could do it. This is our issue. This is our issue. And I would say that from the township, from this board, from this public, from the institutions, and from our staff, we know our issue better. This is uniquely, well, institutions are a broad issue, every community has them, but the way that we have approached it as a community, institutions, this is our issue. Our comprehensive plan includes 50 pages on institutions, right? Other communities come to us for models for how we've at least framed this issue to go forward. This is our challenge, and I think, and it's something that I don't think a third party could come in and everybody would say, you got it. This is something that has to be done with the community and with the institutions and the board all at the same time, so everybody just comes to that together. It's so uniquely personal to all of our zoning in the community. That's why I wouldn't suggest having a consultant, because I just don't think we would find anybody it would just be very difficult.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Lessman. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anyway, Commissioner McComb, why don't you go next?
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. Chris, thanks for the update. It was very helpful. Just a quick question, an easy question, I think, on the Kinwood Trail expansion. You said that construction probably would start this year. Do you have any, and it's always hazardous to say how long construction will last, but it's a pretty limited project extending the trail from the Kinwood Station to Val Station. Do you have any ballpark as to what it would be once we break ground on it?
I don't, because I'm having a meeting on that on Friday, so I can update the board after that. I can update you after that. I don't think it's, as you say, it's not a very long stretch of trail, and there aren't many obstacles. I can't imagine it being long, but I think one of the things that we all have to be cautious of is the supply chain issues.
Exactly.
Today,
Just
I think if we had unlimited resources, we could do that. I think that's going to be more of the constraint.
That'd be great. Thanks again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Commissioner McKeon, please.
Thank you. Chris, just to follow up on the question about the consultant for the campus plans. I mean, I seem to recall when we went through the whole process with DPZ, they were brought in as a national consultant, and they were asked to look into this, and because they couldn't, in my opinion, really resolve it, we had to kick it down the road, and it's still out there now. So I tend to side with you, though, in the position of this may be our problem that only we would know, and we've tried it already with a national consultant, and they weren't able to come up with any kind of a workable plan at the time.
But they contributed. See, it's a dynamic solution to this. They did contribute. I don't think, and I don't, at the end of the day, I don't know when we know we won. It's not broken. It's not like we have it could be better. There are right now, institutions are functioning fine. They function the way they are. There are going to be institutions that need additional impervious surface. We did achieve a great breakthrough in the zoning by creating sub-districts of impervious that allows institutions to be frozen at what they are today. But then, to Mr. Sinai's point, we can build in campus plan provisions that allow them to graduate to additional impervious, which is additional activity, in exchange for something. But the idea is, what are those principles that frame that, and how do we get there? And then also making sure that functions consistently along the way.
Yeah, and then the only other thing I wanted to add, and I think I heard a little bit about this earlier tonight, but I spoke to some residents, and they were under the impression that campus planning would really be done at the same time as a saldo. Not that anyone specifically said that, but I think when we were doing the zoning code, we communicate, oh no, that's for the saldo and the campus plan. They were oftentimes spoken about together, and some people just had the impression,
That's a legitimate point, that we had originally with saldo thought about having campus plan in here, but as I mentioned, with some of these other elements that we're including in saldo, it's a wheel that you can tack a lot of things into. Primarily, saldo is about approving land development plans, and we've added a lot of things to it. We can have a standalone institutional piece with the campus plan and then attach it to it, but it's something that needs its own process. It's with, saldo has, if you've seen it, it's hundreds of pages, it's many different sub-chapters. This one almost requires its own effort, and then you plug it back in.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll say is, I can appreciate too, in terms of time constraints and the amount of things that are on your plate, but hopefully the next time that there's a director's report from building and planning, we can talk about the campus plans again. So just keep it out there so that even if we don't have deadlines or dates, it's not forgotten about.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, I see anyone else online? I see nobody else. Okay. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. And that concludes the Building and Planning Committee meeting for tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. So we're now on to the Special Board of Commissioners meeting. So will the February 23rd, 2022 special meeting of the Board of Commissioners of the Township of Lower Merion please come to order? All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Bernheim.
Better late than never.
Mr. Churchill. Mr. Churchill. Here. Thank you. Mr. Courtney.
Present.
Mr. Gabbard. Present. Mr. Grimes.
Here.
Ms. S. Kramer. Here. Ms. G. Kramer. Mr. McComb. Here. Mr. McKeon.
Here.
Ms. O'Neill.
Here.
Mr. Stevenson.
Present.
Mr. Whalen.
Here.
Mr. Zeloff.
Here.
Mr. Sinai.
Here.
Mr. President, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So this being a special board meeting, we do not have public privilege of the floor this evening. Instead, we go straight to public comment. So this is the section of our meeting where members of the public may address the board on any agenda items. And we ask you to keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. And welcome. If I could ask you to use this podium over here, that'd be really great. And under our current guidelines, if you so choose, you may remove your mask, but you don't have to.
I would prefer not to if you can still hear me.
So it would have to be, it's up.
Fair enough. Laura Gillen, Haverford, and my humble apologies for not being at the Building and Planning Committee meeting. That had been my intent, and I am nonetheless going to ask for an indulgence beyond the 3 minutes because I'm speaking partly as an applicant and not just as a member of the public. This is about the issue for the certificate of appropriateness for 537 Old Lancaster. I do want to address the issues that Commissioner Grimes had asked me to look at, which was some alternatives, but I also did want to address some of the other issues that commissioners had brought up the last time this was discussed. One of the comments was about the preference to take the input of the professionals on commissions and boards that are below the committee level. And I appreciate the process that we use in this community, relying on those devoted volunteers and all the hard work that they do. I do want to note, however, the distinction between the two bodies that consider historic preservation under our Chapter 88. The Historic Commission has some specific requirements for composition and duties, and the HARB is very different. So if you were, to look at Chapter 88, for example, the Historic Commission must have it shall include a registered architect with a minimum of 5 years' experience in historic preservation. It also has to include an architectural historian. And others on that commission must have a knowledge of and interest in preservation of historic resources. The HARB is different. It actually requires one registered architect without any additional qualifiers. And it says one, it doesn't say at least one. We currently have 4, and that's down from a 5 that we used to have. We are required at the HARB to have a licensed real estate broker. I think right now we don't have a residential real estate broker. I think we've got a commercial realtor. We're required to have a building inspector on the HARB, and I don't think we currently have one. And then the additional persons have to have a knowledge of and interest in preservation of historic districts, not resources. Those advisory body duties also differ. So the question had come up whether a contributing resource in a historic district should get the same kind of preservation level as a resource enumerated on our historic resource inventory as Class 1 or Class 2. And again, if you go to our Chapter 88, you'll see that the Historic Commission, their primary responsibility is to designate Class 1 or Class 2 according to fairly high standards. And if you remember, that used to include the National Registry. That requirement went away in 2017, and we have Group A and Group B, Class 1 if you get 3 of those and at least 1 from A, Class 2 if you don't. That's a high standard for Class 1 and Class 2, which does not exist for a contributing resource in a district that's not otherwise classified. The HARB requirements by Chapter 88, which comes from Act 61 of the Pennsylvania Code, are for the preservation of the district, and that's the reason our original chapter was created. They're also very different processes. Contributing resources in a district not otherwise classified on the HRI have to be reviewed according to HARB standards. And the HARB standards include a list of matters to be considered under review, okay? The first item on the list is the effect of the proposed change, the changes I want to make on my home, upon the general historic and architectural nature of the district. Next one, appropriateness of the exterior architectural features which can be seen from the public right-of-way only, the general design, arrangement, texture, material, scale, blah, 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 and the relation of such factors to similar features of buildings or structures in the district. And this is where I think the HARB sometimes gets off track. I don't know that anyone on the HARB looked at other buildings in my district. And if you were to look, and I did send a slide, I don't know if Jody wants to pull that up, but there are a number of other buildings in my district for which the plane of the beam under the roof and the pillars is not the same. In at least 4 cases that I saw, the pillars are actually out from the beam, and I'm asking to go the beam out from the pillars. But our district is not cookie cutter. There's a lot of differentiation within our district. I have other photos that show where the ceiling, the beadboard ceiling, has been applied under the rafters of a porch. And in fact, that happened on 2 that had been recently approved for renovation, one of them which is 507 Old Lancaster just down the street. 507 is one of the twins of my home. I have what Montgomery County calls an old colonial. It's kind of a farmhouse look. The defining feature of that is the porch that goes the width of the front. And there's a couple of them along the way, mostly on Old Lancaster, but that's just one style that's in our community. We also have Dutch colonials, we have Victorians, we have Queen Anne's. It's a district. In addition to considering those matters, if they are going to counsel against, they have to say what would protect the building, the district, excuse me. And then if you look at the memo from Building and Planning for the issue briefing this evening, the historic preservation consultant regularly talks about preserving my historic resource. I'm not a historic resource. I'm a contributing resource in a historic district. She got off this way, and this whole project needs to get back on track. You know, on page 3 of their recommendation, the HARB saw no aesthetic, functional, or preservation need or reason to wrap the beam. It's still my call for wrapping that beam. I believe there is a preservation effort there, and it's not going to in any way endanger the district. And the HARB regularly, under the application of new material over the porch ceiling, the HARB regularly acknowledges that historic resources and materials require maintenance, but altering the visible character-defining features of those resources. The HARB is not supposed to be looking at character-defining features of an individual resource. They're supposed to be looking at the character of the district, and that is specifically by Act 61. The work we do, I'll give you another quote, sorry. They are required to report to the Board of Commissioners the location, the exterior changes, list of changes, etc., and their opinion of the board, including any dissent, as to the appropriateness of the work proposed as it will preserve or destroy the historic aspect and nature of the district. That's what they were supposed to report to you, and they've given you a much more detailed report about my house. The work we want to do in no way will destroy the historic aspect or nature of the district. They're getting into details improperly. The point of our project is to preserve.
So, Ms. Gillen, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up. It's been,
yes,
we've let you go well over the 3 minutes.
And I do appreciate that. I do want to address Mr. Grimes' issue, which was, are there alternatives? I don't think anybody wants us to cover that beam in rolled aluminum or vinyl. I did actually reach out to some other folks for some other materials. One of the other members of the HARB suggested boral. There are some Chinese materials that are a little bit thinner. We would like to stick with AZEK. We've already used AZEK on our house in conjunction with a siding project. I believe the use of a licensed insured contractor with some appropriate treatments, an agreement to maybe waterproof those beams at the edge of the house where they might come to the house itself, and some other considerations. We can make this project work, and we are in no way endangering the district.
Okay, thank you,
sir.
Ms. Gillen. So we will, there'll be an opportunity later for commissioners to respond or make comments on this item once we get through public comment. Does anyone else in the room wish to make public comment on an agenda item? All right, anyone online? Okay, so that concludes public comment, and we will now go on to the Building and Planning Committee. And so we're going to start with the motion we just heard public comment on, so I'll enter as a motion. I move that we move that we approve the replacement of several porch elements in denial of the cladding of 2 existing porch roof elements, citing Secretary of Interior Standard 9, as recommended by the Building and Planning Committee at their meeting held on February 23rd, 2022. Do I have a second? Okay, thank you, Commissioner Grimes. So Commissioner, comments or follow-up questions, if there are any? Commissioner Zoloff.
I have one follow-up question based on Ms. Gillen's comments and this is for staff. Ms. Gillen referred to 507 Old Lancaster, a neighboring property. I believe she referred to it as the twin, so did we just approve something there that we're now, that we may deny tonight? Can you clarify that?
Yes, the condition described by Ms. Gillen, the covering of the porch rafters, was a condition that was present prior to the recent renovation of that residence. So in cases like that, where there is an element that's not being changed, the HARB cannot make an applicant change an aspect of a house that's not part of a larger application.
So what you're saying is that we did not approve a change that is considered for denial tonight on this property before us.
In that specific case, I can unequivocally say that it was an element that was present prior to the HARB's
All right.
review
Thank
of
you.
the application.
Now, may I make a comment?
You sure may.
We're going from questions to comments. So, Ms. Gillen, your preparation is exemplary and remarkable and greater than I think many on this board put the time in to do in terms of sourcing state law to township code. But you said, you know, you suggested that the threshold is not to destroy. And I don't think that's my interpretation of what you said, and I don't think that is the threshold. My comments before you arrived, I will try and make the same comment, which is that the view from the public way is what is relevant here on your property and a property in the historic district. And I think these two features, the two features that you want to clad will impact what can be viewed from the public way. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zoloff. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Courtney.
Thank you, President Stein. I also have a question for Mr. Pritchard, if that's all right. I guess based on Ms. Gillen's statement, it sounds like I think it's clear one of the things we're denying exists in a nearby home. And as she explained it, and I guess my question for you is her explanation accurate in that part of the standard of the contributing resources is that how they relate to each other. And I don't understand if this material and this type of repair already exists in this district, how is it being denied in terms of its relation to its neighbors?
The HARB is not in the practice of recommending approval of an application based on unsympathetic alterations to neighboring resources in the district. So they do look at the neighborhood as a whole, the district as a whole, when reviewing projects. They look for architectural similarities and material similarities, but the argument that, well, my neighbor was able to do something prior to the existence of a historic district, so therefore I should be able to do that is not what the HARB would consider adequate reasoning for an approval.
Are we certain that the material in question on the neighbor's home was actually put in before the creation of the historic district?
I haven't been monitoring it since
Sure.
the 2007 establishment of the district, but I do also want to make a brief clarification about definitions. The definition of historic resource in the Township Code includes Class 1, Class 2 historic resources, and contributing resources within historic districts.
Okay. Thank you. I think my concern here is the sort of arbitrary application of standards within the Haverford Station Historic District, and I know that I am guilty of contributing to that arbitrariness. But I am surprised at how much time we have spent on this, given what the actual visual impact of the change is going to be, given the fact of the variety of materials and non-historic items already present in this historic district. I think while it certainly is within our rights and our legal ability to deny this, I find it inappropriate to single out one home versus others in this district, and I sort of question the standard and existence of this district altogether, and I feel like we ought to be revisiting this whole concept, because it doesn't make any sense to me the way in which we have chosen to enforce it and apply it in this board. I've been in this room and seen people with less valid justifications than the one Ms. Gillen has presented to us. We've allowed them to slide. Perhaps we are the ones to blame for not maintaining this historic district, and I will certainly point a finger at myself for contributing to that, but I don't see why we would start now imposing a hardship on a homeowner who clearly cares about the quality, value, and maintenance of her home. Thank you.
Commissioner Bernheim.
Thank you very much, President Stein. I have one quick question. I apologize, I was not here before, but we'll blame the judge that had last-minute desires to have conference with council. Was there any discussion before as to what the cost differential would be as to what Ms. Gillen's planning and what HARB might be looking for?
HARB has not come up with an alternative proposal. Our hope was that the applicant would continue to work with HARB to come up with an alternative that would meet everybody's goals. So we don't have anything to compare the current application to.
So not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, not to ever have you quoted, we'll have them quickly turn the cameras off. Do you have any idea, just to educate us, what we're talking about in dollars and cents here, as to what a potential difference could be?
I personally do not.
All right, thank you. All right, so then as a quick comment, thank you very much, I appreciate that. Couldn't have said it better than my colleague, Commissioner Courtney has, that I think we've had, our consistency at times has been inconsistency, and I drove by here. Somebody needs an eagle eye, actual eagle eye, to ever be able to tell what this differential would be on this porch. And reconsidering what we do and when we do it, I think is an excellent idea. But this is, without any disrespect to HARB or to the concepts that are being preserved, given this house, what we're talking about, this is really trivial, and I don't think it's going to make a difference that anybody would ever notice. So I understand the vote went in the other direction in committee and probably will go the same way, but I will be on the other side of that. And thank you.
Commissioner Grimes.
Thank you, President Sinai. So I feel compelled to discuss an alternative point of view from my esteemed colleagues. The Haverford Historic District was created after a great deal of effort by our preservation experts, community preservation experts, by people in the community, by the HARB, and it was approved by a previous membership in this Board of Commissioners, although there may be one person here who was here then, who represents part of
Actually, I don't. It's all in Commissioner Stevens.
Well, you're a neighbor.
I'm a neighbor.
Okay. And the reason it was created is because we respect in this township that this township has very unique character. And I apologize, my colleagues have heard me say this before, but I have to. There's very unique character in many of the neighborhoods in this community, and it distinguishes us from being less unique communities that have less value to the people that live with them, people that visit our community. And having established this historic district, we have an obligation to uphold this historic district. And my colleagues are correct. We have not always done that. And I think that's regrettable. I think the most recent example of that, which I won't bring up now, was regrettable, where we choose not to do that. But the fact is that when our historic board, when the HARB has recommended, with the advice of a preservation expert, that this be preserved, and we've established that it can be seen, regardless of whether you need an eagle eye or not, that it could be seen, then it ought to be respected, because if we don't respect it, we chip and chip and chip away at this historic district till it doesn't exist anymore. And frankly, forget about it doesn't exist on paper, it has no value in terms of its uniqueness. And respectfully, and I think this was said, some of these differences may have been created before the district was created, because none of these historic districts are uniform. The one in Gladwin, the Gladwin Acme is in the Gladwin Historic District, and that is non-contributing, but that doesn't mean that there isn't value to the rest of the district, the parts that are historic. So, I would suggest that where this board, and with respect to Ms. Gillen, where this board has the ability to preserve an aesthetic element of this property, and uphold our rules, and where our advisory board has asked that we do that, I think it's incumbent upon us to vote to deny the change that would change the character of the property. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Grimes. At the risk of just completely echoing Commissioner Grimes, which is not going to be a surprise to anyone, let me try and make the following at least somewhat different observations. And that is we have a historic district here, right? It is a historic district. And a historic district, unlike a historic resource, is predicated on the collective action, right? It's predicated on the interaction of all the elements in that district. And details matter, right? Details matter in everything we do, including what the elements are that make these resources contributing to the district, to each other, and to the collective benefit of everyone who lives and works there. We have an expert who says so, who says, the expert opinion is that this is going to matter from the streets, going to matter from the streetscape. It does not have to be our judgment of it in actually good documentation of why this particular element would matter. So I think it's important. I think I am sympathetic to the people who say, yeah, I'm not a fan of historic districts. Look, if you're not a fan of historic districts, we should do what Commissioner Courtney suggested, which is we should get a petition of the people who live and own property in the historic district, and they can put a petition together to ask the board to no longer have a historic district, right? And then we should consider not having a historic district, and that would be the way to do it, instead of unilaterally, property by property, chipping away at it and effectively killing the historic district without any public hearing on that decision through death by 1,000 paper cuts. If this board wants to just get rid of the historic district, that is in the purview of this board to do, and we should raise that issue. We should not do it property by property. And so I'm going to support the denial because I think that if we are going to operate with a historic district, we should enforce the rules of the historic district. And I share my colleagues' sentiments that some of my more regrettable actions on this board have been when I have failed to do that. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, so with that, we're going to take a vote. We have a motion on the floor. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Do we need a roll call vote, Judy? Okay, can you help me count? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9? Okay. Is that 9? You want to raise again for it? Okay, please raise your hand if you are in favor.
Mr. Gabbard's hand first on that.
11.
9.
Okay. All those opposed? 5? The math adds up. Abstains? Okay, 0. Thank you. That passes. Okay, so then I'm going to read the next two items on the agenda together. So I will move two things together. I will move that we approve the appointment of Scott Houchins as zoning officer in accordance with Chapter 5, Article 3 of the Code of the Township of Lower Merion. And I will move that we approve the appointment of Anthony Vale to the Zoning Hearing Board for a 3-year term, such term to expire February 2025. Do I have a second? Thank you, Vice President Gavin. Any commissioner questions or comments? Seeing none?
Yeah, you
Oh, yeah, sorry.
yeah, you
Oh, sorry.
couldn't do that,
Oh,
yeah.
I was too fast.
Yeah,
Commissioner
piece of
Bernheim,
thing.
all right, too slow.
Yeah, someone's got to say, great choices.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bernheim.
2 words.
Anyone else? Okay. Seeing that, okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that, Madam Secretary, those two motions passed unanimously. And with that, that concludes the business of the Lower Merion Board of Commissioners. We are hereby adjourned.
Man, good presentation. Good joke. All right. Don't get thrown. Chad, go home and go back to work.
Yeah.
Very sweet reasons to speak up.